talk crazy about me. That's fine. They should express themselves, and they have a right to. But I also get to say whatever the fuck I want about you now.
The More Power Hour.
I told that motherfucker I was alpha, but I didn't tell him I surrounded myself with generals. It's easy for me right now. You know what I'm saying? If people would shut up, I wouldn't have as much to say.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the More Power Hour. Your host, Penelope Serona, with you as always, and my guest today is Rachel Conn, a Appalachian citizen who has lived in the Appalachian Mountains for well over 50 years. Rachel, will you tell us a little bit about yourself, your age, highest level of education, and what life has been like for you in Kentucky?
Well, let's see. I am 56 years old, 54 of which I have spent right here in this exact location on Arkansas Creek. I have 164 college hours. I like a class here getting a 1 degree, a class there getting another degree, so I don't know what you want to consider that, just however you want to put it.
You're educated.
Right. I've got a little bit of education under my belt. I may not sound educated, I may sound like a dumb hick, but that's from 54 years of living here.
Now, were your parents well educated, or how was their education? Because I know that Eastern Kentucky has always had a problem with literacy issues.
Yes, and for the time, they were considered educated. My mom was a high school graduate. She graduated high school in 1963. My dad, he had to, unfortunately, against what he wanted to do, he had to drop out of high school his sophomore year. He had to get a job to support his mom and his 3 brothers. His mom and dad had divorced, and my grandmother had remarried, but the man she remarried wouldn't work. So my dad was tired of watching his mom go from family member to family member begging for money to buy this or that and pay bills and begging for food. And he said, that's it. I'm going to quit school. I'm going to work with Dad in the mines. And that's what he done. And he regretted it. He lived to be 79 years old, and he regretted that. Not because he helped his family, but because my dad had a dream of being a carpenter. Something he couldn't do without a proper education. And he knew that even when he quit school. He knew. They were both straight A students. Mom had to study and study and study. She had to drum anything in her head. Dad, I guess that's where I get it from. I get it the first time it goes around, or I don't get it. That's how I've always been. And I guess that's the way I'll always be, because that's the way he was for 79 years up until the day he died. So I guess that's how it's going to be for me. I don't know.
Now, coal mining, that's something that has always been very prevalent in Floyd County especially.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that has shaped the culture in this area?
Oh, wow. It's dictated so much, especially if you go to some of the older places, like up there around Drift, McDowell, up at Spewing Camp. There's one of the old mining towns where you drive through a cluster on either side of the road. There's house after house after house after house, maybe 6 foot in between each house. Every house is identical. It was a coal camp. They had houses for the workers, for them and their families to live in. That way, your workers were right there at the mines. You didn't have to worry about them having transportation. You didn't have to worry in the winter about can they get there, you know. You had your employees right there, and they always had a store. And that store was called commissary. And you always went to the commissary. You went there weekly and got your groceries and anything else you needed for your home. That's where you got your kids' clothes. That's where you got your kids' shoes. That's where you got your clothes. That's where you got anything and everything you needed for your home. And that's where you got all your grocery needs. But now you got to keep in mind, people killed their own meat back then. You grew a garden, so you didn't buy vegetables out of the grocery store. They didn't even have vegetables in the grocery store. And they didn't have meat in the grocery store. I mean, that was unheard of. Because people took care of that stuff themselves. Spices, flour, meal, salt and sugar, you know. Coffee. Coffee was the biggest commodity, I would imagine. Everybody drank coffee back then. You start giving your kids coffee when they was 4 or 5 years old. Or younger. I don't even remember the first time I got a drink of coffee.
Well, I mean, even now, coffee is a huge, huge thing in just, I think just Western culture in general, not even just in America. But I could be wrong. Now, so there was all these coal towns and this big boom. And you grew up during this big coal boom. How do you think that affected your generation? Because your generation in this area is just a little bit different than your generation just like in Paducah, Kentucky, for example.
Yeah, because you get down there, they had a few mines in Paducah and stuff, but their mines, the men stood up and walked inside the mines every morning. Around here, my dad worked in 26-inch coal. My dad was 6 foot tall. The smallest he ever was after he started in the mines as an adult, anyway, was 220 pounds. Most of the time he was around 250, 260. He was not a small man by any means. And when he was working in 26-inch coal, he would have to lay on his belly and drag himself by the arms. He would get a hold of the drill. He would do what they call tramming it, which is you just push the on button and let the drill go, and you let the drill drag you with it. So he would let the drill drag him around the mines all day. Now that's one hell of a way to make a living, if you ask me. A man that's willing to do that to feed and clothe his family.
And that was huge around here. Most men in this area were coal miners, or they did something in relation to the coal mines, whether it be run the coal company ran stores, or build the houses, or the railroads, load the coal trucks. It was the biggest financial...
Drive the trucks.
Yes, it was the biggest financial drive in this area for about 30 to 40 years.
Yeah, and you got to remember now, I got in on the tail end of this big boom. I remember when it all went to pot. I was in high school, actually, when the bottom dropped out of coal. I mean, yeah, Dad got to work after that, but not much. There was very little work after that. Dad was always a union man up until the bottom dropped out, and then, of course, he took whatever job he could get. And, I mean, we're talking, my dad was in high demand.
There were a few men like that, though, that just had this ability to be able to manage the situations and handle the high stress that comes from a job where you are literally burying yourself alive and digging yourself out every day. And it's still done in eastern Kentucky, but not quite as much.
Yeah. Dad has, I know he's got one nephew that still works, because we're not talking about strip jobs. You know, most people, when they think mining, they think of strip jobs.
Right, just to clarify, you're referring to deep mining.
Yes, this is underground deep mine. This has nothing to do with up here in the daylight. My daddy very seldom seen the light of day. He went in every morning before daylight, and when he'd come out every evening, if equipment tore up or if something went wrong in there, sometimes it was way after dark before he ever got home from work. So there was days he never seen daylight. Because you didn't come outside the mines to eat your lunch. They always had a little spot, usually at what they called the tailpiece. That's where the belt line started inside the mines. And they'd gather around that tailpiece, whoever was working that shift, and that's where they'd sit and eat their dinner at. You know, everybody had their dinner bucket. And I used to love it when Daddy would, I remember he'd leave like half of an egg sandwich that Mom had fried him that morning. Fried egg sandwich on plain old light bread with a little bit of mayonnaise put on it. And if he left a couple bites, oh, I loved that because I got to eat that. And it had Daddy's fingerprints on it, them black fingerprints from his hands. Oh, and that made it taste so good.
Right.
That made it so good. But I got in on the tail end of it. Now, I remember my dad bringing home $3,000 a week.
And then that was a lot. That would be like somebody bringing in about, what, $12,000 a week?
Something like that, because we're talking the late 70s, early 80s. He was bringing home $3,000 a week. No big deal.
Now, this is an odd question and a little off of the topic, but it goes along with it. Looking at how inflation is now, how much everything costs compared to what people actually make, whether it be a salary or unemployment, disability, Social Security, compared to even once the coal boom was gone and people were truly a little desolated here. What would you say it was harder then than it is now, or would you say that it's about the same level, or that it was easier now than it was then in this area specifically of Eastern Kentucky?
I think it was easier then, simply because we didn't have all this high-tech stuff. Everybody back then grew their own garden. So right there, boom, you had some food. And everybody back then knew how to raise chickens. You knew how to raise a pig to get it up to killing size. You knew how to raise a steer till it got to killing size. And boom, there you had your hamburger, and you had your pork chops, and even your bacon. And then you know, of course, with your chickens, you had eggs, and you had just some fried chicken or chicken and dumplings. So back then it was a lot easier because those are things that people no longer do. It's not very often. Used to, you could start at the head of this holler and go down, and everybody's house had a little garden beside of it or behind it somewhere. No matter how big or small, they had a little garden spot. Even if they just had like some tomato plants, some green onions, and a bed of lettuce, they had some, a little bit growing anyway, even if they didn't have no room. I've seen people use flower pots to grow stuff in if they didn't have the land to do it. And but now you can start the head of the holler and you can just about count on one hand. And Arkansas Creek is a total of 3 miles long, and you can just about count on one hand how many gardens there is on this holler. And that's sad. That's sad. People have got that lazy and that used to just run into the grocery store. It's sad. So it was easier then.
Yeah. Okay, folks, we'll be right back after a few, possible ads. I'm not sure what you'll experience in the delay, but we'll see you on the next segment.